Jace stepped carefully over the broken floor of the alien ruin. His boots crunched on old metal and dust. The air smelled strange like burnt wires, and something older, something forgotten. He held a small light in one hand, and his other hand stayed close to his side where a small blade hung ready just in case something moved. In the shadows behind him came soft footsteps, light and quick. It was Sela, the alien girl who had guided him here. Her skin shimmered like pearl, her eyes glowing soft blue as she whispered for him to slow down. "This place is cursed," she said, not with traps or beasts, but with something worse. He asked what could be worse than death. She did not answer. They reached a wide chamber, broken walls, and glowing moss-lit. The corners, and in the middle stood a dark armor, tall and sharp, like a figure frozen in time. It stood on a black stone platform with strange carvings around it. The armor did not rust, its color deep, like space, with glowing veins that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Jace stepped closer, drawn by something he could not explain. It looked strong, powerful, ancient. He felt it calling to him, though no words were spoken. Sela grabbed his arm, her voice shaky. She said, "Please do not touch it. That is war. Armor from before the stars were mapped. My people sealed it long ago. The warrior who wore it destroyed entire moons. It is not just armor, it is alive." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Alive like a machine." She shook her head. "Not a machine, not a tool. It chooses. It bonds. It never lets go. If you wear it, you will never be the same." Jace smiled a little. He had heard stories before, always told to scare off explorers, but this felt different. He looked back at the armor, and took one slow step closer. The carvings glowed brighter, and a low hum filled the chamber. Sela begged him again, "Please do not wear it. Please, it is not for humans. It is not even for my kind anymore." Jace said, "Maybe it wants to be used again. Maybe it is waiting for someone to finish what it started." He reached out, and his fingers touched the edge of the armor, cold and smooth, like glass, then warm like skin. Then it moved. The armor shifted fast. A piece opened and snapped onto his arm, locking tight. He shouted in pain as heat shot through him. The armor crawled over his skin like living liquid, wrapping around his shoulder and chest. Sela screamed and ran to him, trying to pull it off, but it pulled back. It fought her like a beast. The armor did not want to let go, just fell to his knees. Gasping, he felt like fire burned under his skin. His heart beat faster than it ever had. Visions flashed in his mind, strange worlds, strange wars, and a voice deep and cold, not in words but in feeling. Something inside the armor had woken, and it had seen him. It liked what it saw. Sela shouted his name over and over, her hands glowing as she tried alien tricks to stop the armor. It did nothing. It had chosen Jace. The armor clamped down over his chest, now glowing faint blue symbols moving across the surface like light flowing in water. The room shook, dust fell from the ceiling, and the air changed. Jace stood up slowly, eyes wide, chest rising and falling with sharp breath. The armor stopped growing for now, but it stayed on him. Tight, strong, part of him. He looked down at it. Then at Sela, who had backed away, fear clear in her glowing eyes. She said, "It has begun again. The armor has not awakened in 1,000 years. Now it has, and it picked you." Jace wanted to speak, but his mouth felt dry. His voice came out strange, deeper, with a strange echo. He said, "I feel strong, but I also feel cold." Sela whispered, "That is the war inside the armor. It does not just protect, it pushes, it guides, it makes you want to fight." Jace asked, "Fight what?" Sela said, "Whatever it remembers, whatever it hates." He looked around the room. Again, everything felt different now. The light, the sounds, even the air. He took a slow step forward, and the armor moved with him, smooth, fast, like it had always belonged on him. He did not know if he had made a mistake, or if this was destiny. But one thing was clear now. The armor was his, and it was not going to let him go in. The silence that followed. Jace looked down at his hand, wrapped in the armor's dark shell. It did not feel like wearing something. It felt like his own skin. Now Sela looked at him with sadness and fear. She said, "You are no longer just human. You are something else, and we have to leave. Now others will feel it too. The armor's power has returned, and it will call things that should never wake." Again just nodded slowly, still trying to breathe steady, his heart beating like thunder as the armor pulsed again. Ready to grow more, ready to fight again, and deep inside it, something very old had started to smile. Jay sat by the fire with his back to a cold stone wall, his breath shaky, as he looked down at the alien armor still wrapped around his chest and arm. It was no longer glowing, but it felt heavy, like it was watching him from the inside. His fingers moved, and the armor moved to smooth and silent, like it had nerves of its own. He tried to pull it off again, fingers gripping the edge near his shoulder, but the armor clamped tighter in response, like a living thing protecting itself. Sat nearby, her eyes not on him but on the shadows beyond the firelight. She had not spoken for a long time, only gave him water and watched with a face full of worry. She knew stories of this armor. She had heard tales from her elders about the ancient warrior who wore it, and how the armor had once wrapped around his entire body, sealing itself until he became something no longer alive, no longer dead, but always moving, always hunting. Jace took a deep breath and stood up slowly. The armor did not stop him, but it felt like it moved with him, like it chose each step with him. He walked to a broken piece of mirror that leaned against a pillar. He looked at his reflection, and what he saw made his stomach twist. The armor had changed more than his body, it had changed his face. Something in his eyes looked colder, sharper, like he had seen things that did not belong in a human mind. He turned to Sela and said, "I need this off. I cannot sleep with this thing on me. I feel it inside my skin." She stood up and came closer, her voice quiet but strong. She said, "The armor does not come off. It bonds with the one it chooses. If you fight it too hard, it will fight back harder. The more you resist, the deeper it roots inside." Jace shook his head and said, "No, I will not become something else. I am still me. This thing is just metal and light. There has to be a way to remove it." He picked up a tool from his pack. A small cutting blade meant for metal. He brought it to the edge of the armor and pressed hard. The blade sparked, but the armor did not even scratch it. Instead, it reacted. A sharp jolt of energy burst out and threw the tool across the camp. He gasped as pain shot through his arm like fire. Sela rushed to him, her hands glowing as she touched his shoulder, speaking in her language to calm the armor. The glow spread across the surface of the metal, and it quieted again. Slowly the pain faded, but the armor stayed right where it was, stronger than before. Sela looked into his eyes and said, "This armor remembers every battle it was ever in, every kill, every scream, and now it remembers you too. It learns you, it listens to your voice, your thoughts, your fears, and your rage. The more you feel, the more it grows." Jace felt the truth in her words, and it scared him more than anything else ever had. That night he could not sleep. He sat with his back to the stone wall, watching the fire die slowly, his arm resting on his knee and the armor still pulsing faintly like it had a heartbeat of its own. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then they opened wide again, but it was not because of sound or movement. It was because of a dream, or maybe not a dream at all. He had seen a battlefield with skies burning and creatures screaming in a language older than time. He had seen hands, not his hands, strike down warriors made of light and dust. He had felt joy in the killing, pride in the fear, and then silence. Only silence, and one word echoing over and over inside his mind. Chosen, chosen, chosen. He woke up with sweat pouring down his face, his body shaking, and his hand clenched into a fist. The armor had not moved during the night, but it had grown. Small lines now ran up his neck like veins of blue fire glowing faintly. Sela saw them, and her face went pale. She whispered, "It has started the second phase. The armor is bonding deeper. Soon it may cover your heart, and then your thoughts will no longer be your own guess." Looked at her and asked, "How long do I have before that happens?" She said, "I do not know. It changes with each wearer. Some last days, some last hours, none last forever. Once the armor accepts you fully, you will never leave it, and it will never leave you, even in death." He stood up and looked to the sky, which had started to turn orange with morning light. Far in the distance, a strange sound echoed low and cold, not from any beast or machine. They knew. Sela turned her head sharply and whispered, "We must move now. The armor has called out something." His Answeren just grabbed his pack and nodded. The armor shifted on his body, like it agreed with her, like it too wanted to move, to travel, to reach something only it remembered. As they walked into the morning light, the sound grew louder, and inside his mind, something whispered again and again, "You are mine now, forever, and you will never be alone again." The sun was high above, as Jace and Sela moved through the dead forest trees, black and hollow like burned bones. The air was thick and dry, and every step they took stirred old dust that had not moved in years. The ground cracked under their boots, and the silence felt heavy, like the world itself was watching them from far away. The armor had changed again, its edges now sharper, its surface marked with new glowing lines that pulsed in rhythm with Jace's heartbeat. It did not feel like clothing or metal anymore. It felt like another skin, one that lived and thought and breathed with him, even when he did not want it. Sela kept looking over her shoulder, her long fingers wrapped around a curved blade, her eyes wide and full of fear. She knew what the armor was doing to him, and she had seen it before, long ago, in stories told in whispers. Stories of warriors who lost their names after the armor took their minds. Chess had not spoken since morning. He kept walking with long steps, his eyes fixed on something distant, something he could not see, but somehow knew was waiting for him. Each time the wind blew, he heard whispers in his head. Not voices, but thoughts, pictures, flashes of battles, blood, fire, and endless war. He stopped near a broken stone and placed his hand on it. The armor reacted, glowing brighter and humming softly. Sela asked him what he was doing, and he said he did not know. It just felt right, like his hand had touched this stone before, in another life or in another body, stepped closer and said, "This is how it begins. The armor shows you things, it remembers things, it wants to live again. It will make you believe those memories are your own, and once that happens, it becomes harder to know who you really are." Radiate looked at her and his face was blank, his voice calm, as he said, "Maybe I was meant to wear it. Maybe this is not a curse, but a calling. Maybe the warrior from long ago never died. Maybe he was waiting for someone like Mesh." Shook her head and said, "No, you are not him. You are human. Your heart is different. Your choices matter more than your blood. The armor does not love you, it only uses you, and once it is done, it will leave nothing behind, not even your name." They kept moving deeper into the forest, where old machines lay buried in roots and vines, huge broken weapons covered in moss and metal bones that still hummed with old power. Jace touched one, and the armor reacted again, sending a pulse through the ground that made the machines tremble. For a moment he saw another vision, this time clearer. He was standing on a red mountain, with fire all around him, holding a blade made of light, and screaming in rage as thousands bowed before him. The armor had turned him into a god, and he liked it. He wanted it. He craved. He dropped to his knees, breathing hard. Sela rushed to him, placing both hands on his shoulders. Her voice soft but firm, telling him to fight it. To remember who he was, she said, "Your name is Jace. Your home is Earth. You are not the warlord. You are not the ghost." Jace looked at her, and for a second his eyes were not his own. They glowed with the same color as the armor, and his voice came out deep and cold, saying, "Earth is dust, memory is weakness, only war remains. Only strength survives, only the chosen lead." Sela pulled back her hands, burning slightly from touching the armor. She whispered, "It is speaking through you, it is waking up, and it is hungry. If we do not stop it now, it will take you fully, and I will loose you." He blinked, and the glow faded for a moment. He was back, and he looked scared. He asked her, "What is happening to me?" And she said, "The warrior is inside the armor, and now he is inside you. He died in battle, but his will stayed behind, trapped in the metal, waiting for a body strong enough to carry him again." Just stood up slowly, and looked at the armor on his chest, his hand trembling, as he said, "I do not want to become him. I do not want to forget who I am, but I feel him pushing every time I breathe, every time I close my eyes." Sela nodded, and said, "Then we must find the old gate, the place where the armor was forged. If we reach it, we might find a way to break the bond, or to speak to the spirit inside, and learn what it truly wants." They turned toward the east, where the land rose into jagged cliffs. The wind stronger and colder as they walked. The armor pulsed again, but softer now, like it was listening, not fighting. Jace felt it waiting, watching, deciding, and deep inside he wondered what would happen when they reached the gate, and what the warrior would do if they failed. The forest ended behind them, and the mountains stood ahead, tall and sharp like teeth, and with every step, Jace felt the warrior's thoughts grow louder, and his own thoughts grow quieter, like a voice in the dark, slowly replacing his own asterisk. The wind screamed between the rocks as Jace and Sela climbed higher. The sky above them, no longer blue, but filled with dark clouds that spun like smoke. The mountains felt alive, like they were watching every step, listening to every breath, and waiting for something to begin. Sela moved fast, her feet light and steady on the narrow path, her eyes scanning the sky, her voice low as she warned Jace something was coming, not from the ground, but from above, something ancient, something hungry, something that could smell the armor from across stars. Jace said nothing. The armor had changed again. More of it now covered his back and parts of his legs, the glowing lines brighter, the hum louder, like it was preparing for something. The visions in his head returned stronger than ever, showing him flashes of war, of broken worlds, of fleets falling from the sky, and of a name that echoed through every battlefield. He had seen the name was not his own. They reached a flat plateau high above the trees, where the wind was sharp and cold, and the sky seemed closer than the ground. Sela stopped suddenly, her eyes wide as she pointed up. Jace followed her gaze and saw them ships, 3 of them, dark and silent, dropping through the clouds with no sound, no warning, no light. They moved like shadows, like hunters, and they came fast. Jace stepped forward, but the armor had already reacted. Pieces shifted around his arm, forming sharp edges like blades. His chest grew thicker, his stance firmer, as if the armor remembered how to fight before he could even think. The first ship landed with a soft thud, and from it stepped tall figures wrapped in cloaks of black metal, their faces hidden behind masks with red glowing eyes. They held weapons older than most planets, weapons that whispered when they moved. Sela gasped and whispered. Varix. Jace asked who they were, and she said they served the ancient warrior who once wore that armor. They are loyal to death, and they do not care who wears it now, only that it must return to their hands. The lead Varix stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was not a voice, but something felt inside the bones. It said, "Return the armor and you may live. Keep it, and be hunted until the stars forget your Nemesis." felt the armor grow warm, the blades on his arms pulsing with light. He did not move, but the armor moved for him, shifting his feet into a stance, his arms into a ready pose. He tried to speak, but his voice came out with a strange echo, saying, "This armor has chosen, I will not give it up." The Vorex did not reply, they simply raised their weapons and charged. The battle was like a storm. Jace moved without thinking, his body faster, stronger, sharper. Each swing of his arm sent a blade of energy through the air. The armor blocked attacks before he saw them. His legs jumped higher than human legs should. His hands struck harder than any training had ever taught. Varix was skilled, but the armor remembered every war, every trick, every movement, and it guided him like a ghost with rage. Sela watched from the edge, her hands ready with light magic, but she did not join. She knew this was a fight between the armor and those who wanted it back, a test of will, a test of right. One by one, the Virex fell, their metal bodies broken, their voices silenced until only the leader remained. His blade burned with red flame and his steps were calm. He faced Jace and spoke again, saying, "You are not him, your blood is wrong, your soul is weak, you will." Jace screamed, not with fear, but with something deeper, something the armor pulled from his chest, a roar that split the air as he charged forward. Blades clashing, light exploding with every hitstone cracking under their feet. As the duel raged, then silenced, the Varix fell, his mask split open, his body fading into dust. Jace stood over him, breathing hard, the armor glowing bright, his hands shaking, not from pain but from something else, from what he had become. Sela ran to him and stopped just a few steps away, afraid to touch him, afraid of what the armor might do, afraid of what Jace might do. He looked at her, his eyes still his own, but full of something new, something old, something from the armor. Shay said, "They will not be the last, more will come. The armor has awakened, and now the galaxy knows." Jace nodded slowly, his voice low as he said, "Then let them come." The wind rose again, carrying the ashes of the Virex across the plateau and far into the sky, and in that moment, Jace understood something deep and final. The armor was no longer just on him, it was part of him, and it was not done fighting yet. The cave was dark and quiet as Jace sat near the edge of the pool, his face lit only by the faint glow of the armor on his chest. The water was still, but it did not show his reflection. It showed something else, something with his eyes, but not his soul, something wearing his skin, but colder, darker, more silent than he had ever been. Sela watched him from across the room, her back against the rock wall, her hands folded tight in her lap. She had not spoken since they escaped the mountains, since the Virex fell, since Jace roared like something ancient, and not of earth. She saw his eyes in the fight, and they were not his. They were too calm, too sure, too hungry. The armor no longer waited for danger to grow. Now it moved without warning. It curled around his neck when he slept. It formed strange symbols over his spine and shoulders. It pulsed with thoughts that were not his, and dreams that lasted even after he woke up. Juice tried to remember his brother's voice back on Earth, the sound of his old dog running through wet grass, the way the sky looked on cold mornings. None of it felt real anymore. None of it reached past the armor. He stood slowly and walked to the cave wall, pressing his palm against the rough stone. The armor shifted over his hand like it was scanning the surface or listening through it. After a moment it formed a sharp blade around his fingers and sliced a mark into the wall. Not a word, not a symbol, but something older, a shape that made Sela's heart stop. When she saw it, she stood up and said softly, "That is the mark of the Death March. That is what the old warrior used before he erased an entire moon. Your armor should not remember that. It means the bond is nearly complete. It means you are almost." Gonjes turned to her, his voice quiet but distant, as he said, "I am not gone. I am just becoming what I was meant to be. Maybe this is who I really am. Maybe the armor is not changing me. Maybe it is revealing." Miss Sela stepped back, eyes wide as she said, "No, you are Jace from Earth. You smiled when the stars first blinked in your window. You cried when your ship left orbit. You told me you hated war, and now you draw the mark of extinction, like it is a Nomaeus." Walked past her and sat near the fire picking up a piece of food, but he did not eat it. He only stared at it like it was something strange, like it did not belong in his world anymore. He finally said, "I do not sleep well. When I dream I see his face, the warrior, the one before me. He speaks with no words, and yet I know everything he says. I feel every wound he felt. I see every life he ended, and I feel no pain, no guilt, no fear." Sela moved slowly to his side and sat down, her voice gentle, as she said, "That is not you, that is the armor bleeding into your thoughts. You must hold on to yourself, even if it hurts, even if it burns. You must fight it every day, or you will be lost, and I will not be able to save you." Jace looked at her, and for a moment his eyes were just eyes. Tired eyes, human eyes, and he whispered, "I do not know how much of me is left. I try to speak, and the voice in my mind finishes my thoughts before I can. I try to stand still, and it makes me walk. I try to stop fighting, and it fills me with fire." sat in silence for a long time, until the ground began to shake, dust falling from the ceiling of the cave, and water rippling across the pool. Jace stood quickly, the armor reacting before his feet could move, spikes forming along his shoulders, and, his breath turning sharp. Sella stood with him, and said softly, "They have found us again, not the Varex, not servants. But something bigger, something older, something that remembers the armor from the first war, something that will not ask questions." Said then, "We fight," and the armor flared in agreement, but Sella touched his arm and said, "No, you must hide your thoughts. You must learn to keep something small inside, something human, something the armor cannot reach, if you want to win against what is coming. You must not give yourself away." Jace did not speak, but the armor shifted again, hiding the blades, softening the glow, darkening its shape into smooth lines, like silent stone, and the voice in his head whispered one word again and again: "Survive, survive, survive. Survive." Sella led him through the back of the cave, into a tunnel narrow and old, with walls carved by hands long dead, and as they walked, the sounds from outside grew louder, deep. Voices low, engines, heavy feet on broken ground, and the scent of war filled the air. Jace closed his eyes and tried to remember his own name, the way it sounded when his mother said it, the way it felt in his chest before the armor ever spoke to him, and he whispered it softly under his breath again and again, not for the armor, not for Sella, but for himself, because he needed to know if that name still meant something, if it still belonged to him, or if it was already too late. The cave opened into a wide valley filled with broken towers and shattered stone. Once a city, now a graveyard of metal and ash. The wind carried the scent of old battles, and the sky above was stained with streaks of red and gray, as if the heavens themselves had not healed from the war long ago. Jachi stepped into the open, his armor darker now, the glow hidden beneath its surface like a sleeping beast waiting to rise. His footsteps echoed through the ruins, and behind him Sella followed in silence, her eyes watching not the land but the man she once knew, and the thing he was slowly becoming. They had reached the place, the armor had led them to the source of its power, the center of its memory. The gate. It was not a gate in the human sense, not made of doors or stone, but of energy and light, a circle floating above the ground filled with symbols spinning slowly in the air, each one glowing with an ancient fire that pulled at the soul. The armor responded at once, growing warm across Jace's body, humming with a sound like distant drums. It remembered this place. It had been born here, or forged, or awakened, and now it had returned, and it wanted something more. Ajachi stepped toward the gate, his hand reaching out, but Sella grabbed his arm, her voice sharp and filled with fear. She said, "The gate is not a key, it is a mirror. If you step through it, you will not unlock the armor, you will become it, and the man I knew will be gone forever." Jace looked at her, his face calm, his eyes clear, but the weight of the armor heavy on his shoulders. He said, "I need to know the truth. I need to see what it wants from me. I need to see what I really am, because I am tired of not knowing where I end, and it begins there." Ground trembled, and the gate spun faster, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter as the sky split open. Above them and through the clouds came the fleet, not just ships, but living machines. Beings of light and bone and fury, drawn to the signal of the armor, drawn to its power, drawn to the one who now wore it. Sella backed away, her hands rising with glowing light as she prepared to defend him, but Jace did not move. He watched the ships as they circled above, waiting for the first strike, waiting for his choice, waiting to see if he was still a man, or if he had become the warlord reborn. The voice in his mind grew louder, no longer whispering, now roaring with power. It said, "They will destroy you unless you destroy them first. They will never let you be free unless you show them you are no longer weak. Unless you show them who you truly are." The armor began to change its edges, growing sharper, its surface cracking with light wings forming from his back and blades sliding from his arms, ready to strike, ready to burn, ready to end everything. In one final scream of power, Sella screamed no, but the sound was lost in the rising wind and the burning sky as the first blast came down from above, and the world turned white with heat. Time slower. Jace saw it all, the past, the future, the endless war, the blood, the fire, the silence after every victory. He saw the warrior who had worn the armor before him, saw the look in his eyes when he had lost everything, saw the moment when he had stepped through the gate and left his soul behind. Just stood still, his heart beating, not with rage but with clarity. And in that one breath he saw something the armor did not a choice. He closed his eyes and reached into the light, not to embrace it, but to break it, not to command the armor, but to speak to it as one mind to another, as one soul to something that had no soul left. He said, "You were made for war, but I was not. You want blood, but I want peace. You carry memories of death, but I carry memories of home." The armor trembled, the blades faded, the wings cracked, the light dimmed. A blast struck the ground, but did not hit him. It stopped inches away, frozen in air, as the gate pulsed and shattered the sky, echoing with a sound like thunder and weeping. The fleet paused, the machines frozen, the world silent. Jace dropped to his knees, the armor peeling away, piece by piece, like dead skin falling into dust, his hands bare, his chest rising and falling with the breath of someone who had just stepped back from the edge of forever. Sela ran to him, tears in her eyes, her hands shaking as she touched his face, and said, "You chose yourself, you chose life." He looked up at her and said, "I was never meant to be a god, I just wanted to remember who I was." And in the silence, the ruins stood still, and the sky cleared, and for the first time since the armor had awakened, the voice in his mind was quiet. The morning light returned slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome, the sky now soft blue, with streaks of gold. The wind gentle across the broken valley, where machines once hovered, and fire once fell. Jace sat at the edge of a quiet hill, his hands bare, his chest marked with faint scars, where the armor had once clung tight like a second skin, now gone, turned to ash or wind or memory. Sela stood a few steps behind him, her eyes filled with quiet wonder, as she watched the man who had carried the curse of the old warrior, the one who had stood against fleets and ghosts and voices from a time before stars had names. She held no weapon now, no shield, no glowing light, just calm breath, and the hope that the one she trusted had returned. Jace ran his hand through the grass, feeling the soft blades between his fingers, real and green and alive. The silence around him was not empty, it was peaceful, full of bird calls and the rustle of leaves, the kind of silence he remembered from Earth, the kind that did not press down like a weight, but lifted like a warm breeze. He looked at the sky and whispered his own name. Not for her, not for the ghosts, not even for the armor, but for himself, because now it felt real again. His voice no longer echoed with something else's hunger. It was only him, only human, only Jasith. Armor had given him many things. Strength, speed, power beyond reason, but it had almost taken more than it gave his memories. His feelings, his choices, piece by piece, it had tried to rewrite him, to mold him into something older, something cruel, something made only for war and victory, but he had said no. He had stepped back from that gate, not because he was afraid, but because he remembered who he was, and what he loved, and who he had left behind when he left Earth, and now without the armor, he felt light, not weak, just free. Sela came closer and sat beside him, not speaking at first, just watching the sunrise with him. The silence between them said more than words ever could, and after a long moment, she placed a hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "You are still you, that is all that matters." Jace nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the horizon where light met sky. He said, "I thought the armor would make me something more, something better, but it only showed me what I could lose. I never want to forget again. I never want to let something else speak in my voice, or move my hand or steal my dream." Sela smiled and said, "The armor was strong, but it feared something stronger. It feared your heart, it feared your hope, it feared your choice, because in the end you were not just a warrior. You were human, and that was what saved youth." They stood together and began walking down the hill where the grass grew tall and soft with the sound of water flowing in a stream nearby. Jace felt every step like a gift, every breath like a promise that he could build something new, something without war, without ghosts, without armor. Far above, the stars still watched, but no longer burned with anger or judgment. The old ones who once waited in silence for the armor to rise again now turned their gaze away, for the armor was gone, and the one who wore it had chosen another path. Jews and Sela reached a small village, where children played near stone wells, and elders sat beneath shaded roofs. None of them knew what had happened above in the sky. None of them saw the gate or the light or the moment when history could have burned again. They only saw two travelers, tired and smiling, and alive. An old man offered them bread and a place to rest, and Jace accepted with quiet thanks, his voice steady, his hands calm. No blades, no glowing lines, no whispers in his mind, just warmth and peace and the scent of fresh food in the air. That night, as stars filled the sky and laughter rose from the fire, Jace sat beside Sela and listened, not for danger, not for commands, not for ancient names, just for the sound of life around him, the kind he had almost lost, the kind he now cherished more than anything. And when he finally closed his eyes and slept, he did not dream of battles or burning skies or thrones of bone. He dreamed of earth, of grass and rivers, and skies so wide they made him feel small, but never weak, only free, only human. Only Jasith. Armor would never return, not in this life, not in this world. It had served its time. It had tested its bearer, and it had lost, because in the end it was not power that endured, it was the heart that said no, the voice that remembered its name, and the man who chose to be more than a weapon, who chose to be whole, who chose to be himself.